The main character, Hee-yun, was finally able to set up the magic device properly, from which he felt an incredible and long-awaited feeling of victory. The guy connected some lines and the equipment began to shine, after which the mechanism worked and a cell opened, in which something began to glow. Suddenly, a glowing magic crystal came out. He was delighted. Suddenly the stone rushed upward, like a firefly it illuminated the room. Demonic wars led by their ruler were painted on the wall. Yun realized that the professor's hypotheses were in fact correct. However, at that moment an unknown girl put a gun to his head and said that he was under arrest. The young lady said that he had no right to plunder an ancient tomb. The girl turned out to be an employee of the dragon department named Ho-jin. She ordered her people to search the premises. He mistook her for a policewoman and said that he was a good person and she was mistaken. However, Ho reacted quite sharply and hit him on the head with a pistol, saying that she strongly doubted it, after which she called on her subordinates to be on alert, because this tomb belonged to Han Dongye. After some time, department employees reported that they had discovered some kind of sarcophagus. Satisfied, Jean said that after so many years of service, she had finally found a treasure. Yun noted that, in fact, this was his find. At that moment, someone threw a grenade at their feet, which the girl hastened to inform everyone about. A moment later, an explosion occurred and everything in the area began to smoke. He still managed to push Ho aside. In the dissipating fog, silhouettes of unknown people were visible, and their talking could be heard in the distance. A certain girl said that if they did not find this thing, their heavenly palace would be destroyed. After all, it took a huge amount of time. It was Tao Ran. The main character stared at her and did not understand what was happening. The young lady, in turn, absolutely calmly ordered her people to kill everyone in the tomb. Armed bandits in gas masks immediately rushed to inspect the premises. An enraged Jean noticed that they deliberately used tear gas to intercept Wang Hu. At this time, they managed to surround them and point machine guns at them. Yun realized that his affairs were extremely bad. After all, today he has already been threatened twice by armed people. Meanwhile, Tao ordered her subordinates to take the sarcophagus away. Then Ran approached the main character and asked if he really found this artifact. Yun thought her face was very familiar, and he literally stared at her, which naturally she didn't like. The girl said that it was extremely impolite for him to stare at a lady like that. Ho asked if he had never seen a girl with a veil. He replied that that was not the case at all. Suddenly the young man caught himself thinking that this was actually the same Tao. At that moment, one of the bandits opened a sarcophagus, inside of which lay a skull with horns. It seemed to be sucking the life out of the guy. After which his body was engulfed in a magical glow. Everyone panicked and began to scatter in different directions. Seconds later, the man literally turned into a horned devil, his clothes torn to shreds. Naturally, the bandits ran away from him and opened fire from machine guns. Thus, the monster came under a barrage of bullets, but it did not harm him in any way. The demon became even more angry and let out a loud roar, as if the tomb shook. After which the monster ran towards them, knocking down everyone in its path. The bandits began to realize that it would be extremely difficult to defeat the monster. At a certain moment, the demon found himself near Ran and hurried to attack her. At this time, the soldiers again opened fire on the monster, thereby attracting attention to themselves. Finally, the embittered monster turned around and fixed his menacing gaze on them. After which, with lightning-fast movements, the demon approached the shooters and began to kill them one by one. As a result, the room was filled with corpses of people, and the monster again headed towards Tao. Suddenly, the horned monster leaned towards the girl and began to peer at Ran. Then, growling menacingly, the monster again hurried to strike the girl, but was suddenly interrupted by He, who barely held the lid of the sarcophagus and said that he would not dare to harm her. Finally, he covered the coffin with a heavy slab and declared that his time had come. At this moment, the demon seemed to begin to choke and hit the wall with his hand. Tao backed away. A few seconds later, the monster was covered in magical green flames. The creature screamed in pain. Ran once again looked at the young man and was again visited by a familiar feeling. For some reason it seemed to her that he was sent to protect her. The girl remembered her beloved general, whom Yun looked very similar to in appearance. The most vivid memory was how they lay under the sakura and had carefree conversations. The ruler said that the blue spring of Huangquan had come and he would always protect her. He also looked at her in surprise. However, the sweet memories were suddenly interrupted by Jean, who decided to take advantage of the moment and attack her. But Tao, in turn, managed to block her blow, which came as a surprise to Ho. The girl said that the time had come to put handcuffs on everyone and hurried to implement her plan. Ran instantly ordered her charges to immediately retreat, which they began to do. One of the bandits said that they needed to take away their friend, who had reincarnated back into a human. But Jean decided to prevent the rescue of their comrade and rushed to catch up with them. However, at this time Tao attacked her with her whip. Ho managed to jump to the side. The girl noticed that a grenade was thrown at her feet again. Jean wanted to throw her at Ran, but the main character was against such a development of events. In connection with this, he hastened to push her away and said that this was an unusual grenade. Subsequently, an explosion occurred in the tomb, and the bandits rushed to the exit in a hurry. And only Tao continued to look at Yun and find similarities in appearance with the general. Ho, in turn, was angry with the young guy, which she furiously stated. He began to ask her for forgiveness and say that it happened by accident. The girl looked after the fleeing criminals and understood that she would no longer be able to catch up with them. The young man thought that now was the time to run away and slowly headed towards the exit. Naturally, he failed to do this, because the angry Jean immediately overtook him with a kick in the ass. Yun noticed that she shouldn't be so angry, much less hurt him. Ho answered him quite pathetically that the one she arrested would not be able to escape. After a short period of time, the guy was still picked up and taken to a certain tent base. Not finding this insidious girl nearby, he hastened to leave this place. But as soon as he took a step, he was stopped by the disgusting voice of Jean, who declared that he could not escape, adding that if he still tries to escape, he will instantly lose his head. The young man replied that the air was clean here and he decided to take a short walk. At that moment, a truck suddenly passed between them, and the main character coughed from the dust. Ho said that because he saved her in the tomb, she forgives him, but they have a serious conversation ahead of them. Yun decided to focus on the fact that he really saved her and she should be more peaceful. Jean ignored him and asked her questions about who he really was and what he was doing in Han Dongyu's tomb. The guy didn't know how to answer her without making a mistake and getting into even bigger problems. In the end, he decided to play a game with her and introduced himself as a soldier of the Dragon Department under a fictitious code number. Initially, the young lady fell for his trick, and after saying her number, she asked what department he was from. Thinking that his trick had worked, he became more confident in throwing around the big names of the department and named the commander Guiyao. After which, smiling maliciously, he noted that he would have to write a report to his superiors, because she had missed an important goal. Jean literally started begging him not to do this, as if she was hinting that they could come to an agreement. Yun continued to play and stated that if she helped him achieve his goal, he would recommend her to the general. However, his plan did not work, as Ho revealed that she was the commander-in-chief of the department, and the general was her father, after which she twisted the young man's hand. The guy replied that in fact he was a law-abiding citizen. The extremely cruel lady still let go of her hand and said that if necessary, she would definitely interrogate him. Then she called the soldier on the radio and asked where her transport was. He found this strange, because she should have already picked up the skull of the god of war. A subordinate told her that a certain girl pretended to be her and stole the artifact. Everyone thought it was her. Ho became furious. Stunned, Yun ran to the truck and urged her not to hesitate to return the skull of the god of war, because he actually attached a bug to the top lid of the sarcophagus, and they will be able to determine its location. Jean immediately ordered the soldiers over the radio to prepare everything they needed and said that she was going in search of an artifact. After getting into the truck, the girl again asked the main character who he was. The guy replied that he was a student at Harborne University and his name was Yun. Then, with the help of his innovative wristwatch, he saw that the target was on the harbor, which Ho reported. The insidious guardian of the law urged him to buckle up, because the trip would not be easy. Jean sent the coordinates to her fighters, who were already confronting a huge number of bandits on the harbor. Meanwhile, our heroes arrived at the scene. The girl turned the truck around and braked sharply, after which she ordered Yun to stay in the car, while she took out a pistol and went into a shootout. He noticed that she was extremely unceremonious and incorrigible, and such people usually end badly. However, as soon as she left the truck, they started shooting at her. The guy crouched down in the cab. One of Jin's soldiers greeted her and ran over to report the situation. The subordinates said that the bandits pretended to be people from their department. Ho still managed to hit General Tiangong Takfu with a bullet, who clearly did not expect this. His compatriots began to worry about their commander. Yama, in turn, wiped away the blood and continued the firefight. Moto declared that he would tear to shreds the one who dared to wound him. The general was furious. Tao hurried to calm him down so that he would not forget about the original task. After all, first of all, they promised Dr. Ren that they would complete the mission. This means they need to deliver the skull of the god of war to Sato at any cost. The embittered General Takfu noticed that at the moment the helicopter had not arrived yet. Therefore, there is time to kill these crooks and have some fun. What Ran did not support in any way, but the extremely fanatical Yama still rushed into battle and began to shoot the employees of the Dragon Department. After which he began to fire at the truck, in every possible way provoking Jean to fight him. The girl naturally did not intend to come out from behind the cover and called on the soldiers to keep their heads down as well. After waiting for the right moment, Ho nevertheless jumped out from behind the truck and returned fire at Moto. As a result, the enraged Takf injured his hand, but he continued to bravely walk forward. On the contrary, it seemed that he was amused by the fact that he was facing a worthy opponent. Ran, in turn, understood perfectly well that in fact he was acting recklessly. At this time, General Yama took cover behind one of the containers and pulled the pin off the grenade, which was subsequently addressed directly to the truck where Jean was. However, Yun again arrived in time and once again saved the girl, which he hastened to remind her of, so that it would count against him in the near future. Tao saw the young man and froze in place. She still peered into the features of his face and found a striking resemblance. Meanwhile, the long-awaited helicopter flew to their aid and dropped the rope. The bandits instantly fastened the sarcophagus. General Moto shouted that the Dragon Department was very lucky this time. Jean, in turn, ordered the soldiers to rush after them and open fire. Takfu took he at gunpoint, but Ran managed to hit his arm with her whip. Thus, the bullet hit the ground a centimeter from the frightened guy. Yama did not understand why she did this. Tao replied that Dr. Ren needed this young man alive. After which they flew away. The angry Ho realized that she had missed her target again. Then she unexpectedly put the main character on his knees and put her hands on his back to handcuff him. Jean stated that Yoon was arrested and she would definitely find out how he is connected with criminals. Meanwhile, General Moto and Ran delivered the long-awaited sarcophagus to the professor. The overjoyed doctor fanatically rushed to him and said that he urgently needed to open it. Yama noted that it was dangerous and that one should be careful. Ren replied that the energy in him had already been released and now he did not pose any threat, adding that the guy who opened it first was simply unlucky, because he just absorbed the magical power of the sarcophagus. After which the doctor very carefully moved the top lid. Light spilled from the sarcophagus. Tao covered herself with her hand just in case and said that these sensations were familiar to her. Ren, in turn, took out the skull of the god of war and was happy as a child. The professor naively believed that he would soon surpass Zhou Yongzhu himself. At this time, the insidious head of the Dragon Department interrogated he, urging him to tell the truth. The guy kept saying that he was a student at Harborne University and she could find out about it from Professor Zhou, who noted that the first person from the Yongzhou archaeological community never had any students, and if it turns out that Yun is lying to her again, then he will spend the rest of his days behind bars. Naturally, the main character agreed and repeated again that he was not lying to her. The next day, Jean handcuffed the young man and they went to the institute. He earnestly asked her to remove the handcuffs, as others would misunderstand them. At that moment, one of the students unexpectedly recognized him and joyfully called out to the teenager. The girl ran up to him and invited him to dinner at her home, where they could watch a movie. But Yun hastened to inform her that he is now very busy with important work and will not be able to come to visit. The upset young lady indignantly asked why this girl was better than her and pointed to Ho. Jean, in turn, decided to solve the problem and, showing her badge, stated that she was from the police. The lady instantly disappeared and said that next time he would definitely not get away with it. He decided to take advantage of the moment and said that she was convinced of his identity and could remove the handcuffs. However, Ho did not fall for his trick and replied that he could have planned it in advance. Then, approaching Professor Yongzhu's door, the guy said, now she will understand that he was telling her the truth. but a tearful student ran out of the door and asked if they had really come to Zhou's funeral. The shocked protagonist pushed the teenager away and ran into the office, where he saw the coffin of his mentor. The student said that he had a heart attack. Yun suddenly felt ill and sat down on the floor, after which he himself began to sob bitterly. He could not believe what had happened. After a certain time, the funeral took place. He quietly told Yujia that he had found the tomb of the god of war. At that moment, Ho reported that she had received information confirming his identity, and heavy rain began to fall. The girl added that he could not restrain his emotions. She showed condolences in an extremely absurd way. Yun couldn't stand it and pushed her away, saying that if she hadn't been so bitchy and believed him in the first place, nothing would have happened. And it was only because of her incomprehensible methods that he did not return in time. After which he collapsed to the ground again and began to sob like a child. Jean decided not to touch the guy at such a moment. Suddenly, one of the students gave the professor's diary to the young man and said that Zhou asked her to give the notes to him. Opening the notebook, he read that if he had the diary, it means he was already dead. He asked his student to continue his work, because even without a skull, the professor was able to prove that the god of war was a man. Yun turned his sad gaze to Zhou's tombstone and said out loud that he had always been right in his theories. Curious, Jean asked the teenager to give her the diary to review. However, the main character was against this and sharply slammed the professor's notebook. Then he looked at her menacingly and said that from now on it belongs to him. But Ho stated that his diary could help the country and therefore he would have to give her the book. Their debate was interrupted by Dr. Ren, who began to say that he was very sorry for losing his friend Yongzu. After all, no one else could come close to his knowledge of archaeology. The embittered Yun said menacingly that he did not know him and it was better for him to leave here. The professor saw Zhou's diary in the guy's hands and assumed that the young man was his heir. The main character again repeated his demand, continuing to drive away the person unknown to him. At this time, Jean unexpectedly noticed that the doctor would still have to stay, because he is suspected of robbing national property, and therefore he should be arrested. Suddenly, Tao attacked Ho and called for Ren to leave the place immediately. The head of the dragon department took a closer look at the girl and said that it was she who was in the tomb. Ran refuted her guesses and replied that this was the first time she had seen her, after which she took out her whip. Jean, in turn, took out handcuffs and very convincingly urged her to surrender. At that moment, Yun stood between them and declared that they had no right to arrange something like this near the professor's grave. The girl pushed him away and said that he was now interfering with her official duties. Suddenly the guy met Tao's gaze and they looked at each other again. The teenager suddenly began to see double, his consciousness became clouded. As a result, he lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Ho managed to catch him, while Ran abruptly stepped aside and began rummaging through her memories. The young lady constantly thought about her general, whom this young man was very similar to. The warrior was an extremely brave commander and was never afraid of death. He was always one of the first to engage in battle with the enemy, and he almost always prevailed over the enemy. The general was a truly legendary ruler. Once he destroyed an entire army to rescue her from captivity by robbers. Tao joyfully ran towards her beloved savior, anticipating the long-awaited freedom, and with tears in her eyes she rushed into his arms. The ruler was also happy that she was alive. The general always said that he would never let anyone hurt her, because he followed her everywhere. Ran did not expect that he would walk more than 800 miles for her sake and that they would meet again. The commander told her that no one could ever separate them, and he would always protect her. It seemed like it was a dream and not reality. Suddenly they were drawn to each other. At this moment, the main character, lying on the couch, stretched out his lips. Jean began to wake him up. He woke up and realized with bitterness that in fact it was still a dream. Ho asked him if Yun remembered what happened to him before he entered the university. The young man thought about it and realized that he really did not remember that period of his life, which he told the girl about. The head of the department said they found out from the database that he was an employee of their organization. The teenager began to say that this could not be and their base apparently had failed. Jean went to the window and said that their secret base never makes mistakes and this case is no exception. Moreover, the institute's cameras spotted one extremely interesting detail. Not long ago Tao was in his room. The guy literally changed his face. He went to the window and made sure that it was closed, which meant this couldn't happen. Then the young man sat down on the bed and said that he himself would not understand why Rant's face seemed familiar to him. Suddenly he jumped up and said that he had a strange dream with her participation. Ho was surprised and urged him to talk about this incomprehensible dream. Yun reported that in his dream he walked several hundred miles fighting bandits to save her. After listening to his story, the girl grabbed the handcuffs, and perplexed he asked what she was up to. Jean smiled and stated that she just wanted to bring him back to their team and maybe he would soon remember everything. After which she once again handcuffed him and said that he was under arrest. The young man, in turn, asked if she was tired of constantly doing this. The next day, Yun went to the Dragon Organization's residence, where he was informed that he had a code number. Jean's father said that during his training the guy was awarded the title of excellent student, but unfortunately, he suddenly dropped out of school without explaining anything, which is what Guiyao mentioned. The main character stated that for some reason he does not remember all this and even the premises are not familiar to him. Moreover, he was absolutely sure that he was seeing them all for the first time in his life. The general threw the accounts at him and urged him to personally verify the opposite. Having opened the book, he was shocked, because it really contained his personal data with a photograph. Yun didn't understand how this could be and what was really happening to him. Guiyao also wanted to understand what happened to the young man's memory, and why one of the best soldiers suddenly leaves the service and goes into the unknown. The young man has a sharp headache. Moreover, after 10 years of studying at the university, he never graduated. The general asked him how it happened. The main character replied that he spent most of his time helping the professor with research and had nowhere to go. Unexpectedly, Huo announced that Zhou's grave was empty. He literally changed his face. He asked how this was possible. Guiyao said that Yongjie collaborated with their organization. The professor was their senior consultant, and he would not want to doubt him. Therefore, they suspect Tiagong, who was at the professor's funeral, because they managed to get the skull of the god of war. An embittered Yun declared that he would not allow them to use his mentor. The general liked the young soldier's attitude and noticed that their blood still flowed in his veins. After which Ho displayed a photo of Tao and said that they had no evidence to arrest her and they knew about their relationship. Guiyao then put his hand on his shoulder and invited him to join their ranks again. Indeed, in this case, he will be able to get to the bottom of the truth and even influence the outcome. The guy decided to join their organization, which he saluted and announced. The general hurried to notify the newly joined soldier that he would be working with Jean, which the young man was not very happy about, since he would again have to endure her intolerable character. At that moment, Ho and Puklia entered the room and headed to the boss. Guiyao told his daughter that he was leaving the teenager to her and really hoped for their fruitful cooperation. Unexpectedly, Puklia showed a desire to also join the team. After all, Tiaganga took his family for her terrible experiments, and he wants to take revenge on them. The general, in turn, allowed him to make his vendetta a reality, saying that justice must come to everyone. After which Ho sighed heavily and said that he was counting on them very much. The newly formed team saluted him and assured him that everything would be in the best possible way. First of all, he wanted to regain his memory and understand everything in order to punish those who were involved in the death of the professor. After some time, Yun went to Zhou's library, where he began to study his notes. The young man wanted to find at least some clue from Yongjie about the skull of the god of war. Waddles came up to Yun and said that he would never have been able to deal with this pile of books. Jean began to urge the teenager in every possible way and ask if he had found anything. The main character urged her not to talk about the great archaeologist Zhou in such a tone in front of him. Ho grabbed the handcuffs and said that if he misbehaved, she would arrest him again. While looking through the books, he replied that he didn't want to catch her bitchiness. Waddles asked them to calm down and concentrate on their work, otherwise they would not succeed. After a long time, Jean was losing all hope. However, Yun shouted that he had found the necessary information. The girl immediately asked what exactly he was talking about. He said that similar hand bones had previously been excavated and a device was used to extract energy from it, which is located in Dubai. Ho stated that they definitely need to go there so that they do not have time to escape. Meanwhile, the doctor continued to conduct his crazy experiments. However, he was never able to achieve the required result, which only made Ren more furious. He was annoyed by the fact that he could not possibly surpass the late Yongjie. Tao noted that Zhou had devoted his entire life to this research and therefore he would not succeed so soon. The doctor urged her not to be smart, because he knew the professor better than she did. Unexpectedly, Ren discovered that this installation could extract energy from unusual bones. He rejoiced like a child, naively believing that this time he would be able to surpass Yongjie. Ran noticed that he only had 3 months to do everything right, since he must not let the doctor down, otherwise he knows what will happen to him. Ren didn't like Tao's tone and said that he could cope without this device. The girl noticed that in this case it should be removed, because it takes up too much space, adding that they should hurry up and leave for Dubai as soon as possible, after which she left with General Takfu. The doctor only looked after her with displeasure. He was extremely annoyed by the fact that the arrogant girl decided to play with him. After some time, he, Waddles and Jean flew up in a helicopter to the landing site of a luxurious building on the water, after which they hurried to go down to the people meeting them in Dubai. An extremely friendly Arab greeted them, breaking into a friendly smile. The main character noticed that they, in turn, were full of enthusiasm and also greeted them. However, the man walked past he as if he had not noticed him and headed towards Hua. Having started to compliment her, however, Jean, as always, was not polite. The girl instantly pressed her knee into the Arab's stomach and urged him not to come too close to her. The perplexed sheik noted that this was just hospitality and she should respect their culture. The extremely ill-mannered lady pushed him away and replied that we were not talking about any culture. The man said that for some unknown reason she was too cold towards him. Yun asked Waddles who he was. The guy replied that he was a king named Carls and one day Ho arrested him for reselling artifacts. Jean resorted to her traditional trick and took out handcuffs and began waving them in the Arab's face. The sheik instantly said that she had misunderstood him, and the girl urged her to get straight to the point. Carl smiled and said that any word she said was law to him and asked them to follow him, after which he led them to a luxurious room and declared that this room had been prepared especially for them, adding that this room should be to their taste. The room really looked rich. He was amazed by the beauty of the interior, which he began to talk about admiringly. Carl sat down on the sofa and encouraged them to settle down and feel at home. Satisfied, Yun literally fell onto the soft sofa and noticed that it was much more comfortable here than in the helicopter. The Arab got to the point and said that he was able to locate the device they needed. He showed the lock of the owner Enko on the screen and said that there was security there around the clock, and there was also an infrared device. Enko himself loves to dance and does not hide it. Besides, he is African American, and only beautiful girls can visit his castle. At that moment Carls looked at Ho and smiled. He was extremely surprised that Jean would do such a thing and seduce this character, after which our heroes changed clothes and began to inspect the territory of the castle, but they never found the guards. Waddles was unhappy that they had to wear those uncomfortable tuxedos. The girl noticed that she herself was not delighted with this dress, but if the plan did not work, then they would have to resort to a spare one. Yun and the guy naturally agreed with the captain, noting her attractiveness. Suddenly, Ho grabbed their heads and urged them to take the task seriously. The guys began to joke, which did not please the young lady, who ordered them to get to work. At this time, Waddles asked them to wait and began to rummage through his bag. Then he took out innovative glasses, saying that at the moment this is the most high-tech device. The main character noted that this is a really smart device for such a mission. With the help of glasses, they saw how protected the castle was. There were security sensors literally throughout the building. Jean assured the young man that such a security system always has a weak spot. Then she pointed to one of the castle towers, where the power supply for all the security systems was located. Waddles immediately took out a sniper rifle and shot the power source. As a result, the entire system really fell apart, and the sensors malfunctioned. The soldier sighed with relief, because he understood that if he had missed, the mission would have been a failure. Captain Hua then ordered the crew to immediately head inside the castle, where their presence was already known to Enko. He looked forward to meeting the disruptors of his peace. The bones on his hand were visible as if they were X-rayed. The guy was excited about the upcoming fun. Meanwhile, the team led by Jean was approaching a huge building. Yun noticed that everything went too smoothly. The girl also found it strange, but she still ordered the young man not to escalate the situation. However, the main character was uneasy, which he continued to talk about tirelessly. Ho stated that she understood his paranoia since this was his first assignment. At that moment, a huge water hand rose from the lake and headed towards them, but he still managed to push the girl away at the last moment, thereby saving her once again. Waddles instantly began to shoot at the magical water hand, but failed to cause any damage to it. The teenager grabbed his gun and lowered it, saying it was useless, because it is something like the skull of the god of war and firearms will not harm it. Jean asked if this was the same hand he was talking about. The young man answered positively. He really seemed very strange to Ho, because not so long ago Yun was able to get into the tomb alone. At this moment, the guy crossed his fingers in a characteristic way and muttered something under his breath. A moment later, a magical golden circle appeared. Waddles and Jean were surprised by its skills. The teenager confidently said that this was a feng shui sealing technique, after which he fell to his knees and placed his palms on the ground, after which magical lines appeared. After a couple of seconds, the water hand was placed into the golden magic cylinder, and then it completely turned into a small puddle, thereby eliminating the threat. The girl suddenly slapped him upside the head and threateningly asked why he hadn't used his abilities before. Yun asked her a counter-question. Had she not encountered something like this before? Ho decided to remind the purpose of the mission, that they needed to stop Tyagonga and return the Skull of War. At this time, Enko looked out the window and saw his uninvited guests. He did not expect that he would encounter a feng shui master. The man realized that he needed to take them more seriously and should not underestimate the enemy. Carls began to assure Enko that they were only here to take the Skull of War. He decided to make concessions, because it was thanks to the Arab that he was able to get a magic brush. A couple of seconds later, the main entrance suddenly opened in front of Team Hua. The extremely surprised soldiers carefully walked inside Enko's castle and looked around, realizing that this was not just the case. Jean decided to find out what the young man used to seal the water hand. He replied that it was a feng shui technique consisting of 5 elements. At that moment, he caught himself thinking that he had never studied this skill before, but at the same time he knew about it. Yun urged them to be on guard, because this castle could hide many secrets. Suddenly Enko came out to meet them and said that he did not expect guests so early, after which he asked them to forgive him for his rudeness and broke into a malicious smile. However, he urged everyone not to approach him, as suspicious energy was emanating from his hand. The man noticed that the hand was quite difficult to implant into the arm. Then he called on them to continue the fun again and attacked with magical lightning. The main character once again rushed to use his feng shui technique. As a result, he blocked the blow of the self-confident Enko quite painfully. Ho, in an unusual manner, became worried about Yun and very carefully took his hand. After which the strange man urged them to go into the living room and make themselves at home. Surprised, he noticed that he was showing hospitality in a very strange way. Walking inside, Ho saw ancient artifacts of Wakasia in the form of large statues. Enko asked the guy if he really was a feng shui master, since this technique was stronger than his magic brush. At this moment, the head of the dragon department suddenly pulled out a pistol and pointed it at him. Then she said that he was arrested and accused of stealing cultural relics. Enko raised his hands and said that he considered her to be his guest who came to his ball. Yun lowered her gun and stated that firearms would not work against him. In addition, his hand is capable of controlling all sorts of elements, and bullets will not harm him. The owner of the castle laughed and said that this young man was extremely smart, and he asked them to wait for the skull of the god of war. Jean did not understand how he could know about this, adding that he couldn't wait for this moment. Team Hua thought it was strange. At that moment, Carls came down the stairs and greeted the guests, after which the main character and Puklia left the office and went straight to the ball. He said that it was in vain to leave them alone. Meanwhile, Jean pressed the Arab to the wall and asked if he had decided to betray her. Carls, in turn, stated that he did not betray her and she misunderstood everything. Ho suddenly struck, but hit the wall. The guy managed to dodge. The angry girl called for the truth. The frightened Arab said that Enko forced him. The angry lady said that if he lied to her, she would send him back to jail. Unexpectedly, the man admitted that when she first arrested him, he fell in love with her. The girl did not expect this and ordered her not to say such things. Carl said that, as she already knows, he collects artifacts. Without listening to the end, the unbalanced young lady grabbed him again and said that this was not a reason to betray her. The guy asked to let him finish that Enko is his precious client and accidentally saw information about the device. That day he was looking at diamonds and wanted to buy them, as he always had a craving for such things. At that time, Carls was just looking at this device. The guy asked if he had a unique product. For example, something similar to a magic hand, or something similar. But the Arab replied that he didn't have anything like it now, and if it appeared, he would be the first to know about it. Enko saw what book he was flipping through and stated that this device was intended for unusual artifacts. After which he pushed him. The guy fell to the ground and said that this was for the skull of the god of war. Ho was furious, because in fact it was he who told him about the car. Carls replied that he had no choice. Hearing some noise, Enko asked what was going on there. Yun smiled and said, Jean is practicing his techniques. A moment later, a frantic Arab ran out of the door and began asking for help. The man asked him to hurry up and take his seat so as not to miss the show. An angry Ho came out after him and said that Carls told everything to Enko. The main character sighed heavily and said that it would not be easy to pull this off. At this time, the owner of the castle took the Arab into the room and pressed him against the wall, asking him why the skull had not yet been brought to him. Frightened Carls began to say that it did not depend on him, but on those people. Then he said that she had another treasure as a consolation, after which he put his hand in his pocket. And he took out a glove, saying that he found it next to his hand. Naturally Enko became interested. The man instantly snatched the glove from his hands and nervously said that it now belonged to him. Putting it on, he stated that he already felt its power. Carls noticed that it was created for the owner of a magic brush. After which he began to show off and say that this glove is really beautiful. However, a moment later, Enko felt a wild pain in his hand. The glove literally squeezed his hand. At that moment he collapsed on the floor and said that he would kill him. The Arab only smiled in response. Then he said that this glove serves as insulation and now he will fully feel its power, adding that he was just his lab rat. Suddenly Carls stepped on his hand. The pain became unbearable. The sheik absolutely calmly took out a knife and declared that in fact this brush belonged only to him. Enko begged him not to do this, but the Arab cut off his hand in cold blood. Carls finished the job, and sitting down on the sofa, he noticed that he had forgotten who made him so powerful. After which he took off his glove and twirled the magic brush in his hands, realizing that now he was its only owner. The sheik walked up to the painting and moved it, revealing a safe behind it, which not so long ago also belonged to him. After looking around and making sure that no one was nearby, he typed in the password. As a result of which a secret room opened in front of him. Carls hastened towards his fate. He naively believed that the world would fall at his feet and from now on life would change dramatically, and the unapproachable Jean will become his faithful wife, which the Arab has dreamed of for so long, while the installation they were looking for was actually under their noses. The distraught sheik hastily placed the brush into the appropriate device. Then, gathering his thoughts, he took out a knife and rolled up the sleeve of his left hand, after which he cut off his limb extremely painfully. The process was not easy, and after a couple of seconds, Carls put his hand into the car. Pain pierced his body. At that moment, an explosion occurred and one of the metal walls was deformed. As it turned out, Takfu dug a tunnel from the other side and fired a rocket launcher at the wall. However, he never achieved the required result, which left him extremely disappointed. General Yama contacted Tao and reported that he had reached a metal wall and that their target might be behind it. The girl replied that they, in turn, successfully made their way inside the castle. Meanwhile, the ball was in full swing. Ho and he, dancing, ordered the young man not to look in the direction of the doctor. Ran urged Moto to continue attacking the wall until they found the entrance. Naturally, Takfu continued to fire missiles at the metal barrier. It seemed that the whole castle shook. Carls became nervous and began to mentally adjust the device. Yun heard a roar and assumed it was an earthquake. Jean was sure of the opposite. Then I saw Diar, Ren and Tao hurrying to leave the banquet. Ho nervously said that they had to arrest them and return the skull of the god of war. Ran and the doctor entered Enko's room and found him dead, with his hand cut off. The girl instantly contacted Moto and ordered him to stop firing at the wall as they had found the entrance. Ho and the main character ran after them, who could not understand why the dead Enko's hand was cut off. Seeing the entrance to the secret room, they rushed inside. Jean understood that this was the work of Tiagong. At this time, General Yama refused to comply with Rant's demand and declared that he would never retreat, after which he again continued to shoot from the rocket launcher at the metal wall. Carls, in turn, could not complete the process of merging Enko's hand with his arm. Although he was well aware that he had very little time left to complete the operation, he fanatically repeated to himself that soon this world would know his true power and it could not be otherwise. However, after a couple of seconds, Moto was still able to make a hole in the wall, which made him delighted. The Arab, meanwhile, had just successfully completed the splicing process and was ready to meet the uninvited guests. Using his magic brush, he literally shot pieces of the wall into the hole and cut Takfu's cheek. Thus, he was able to slightly harm him. Yama became extremely curious to look at the brave man. The general, with the skull of the god of war at the ready, flew into the room and took out his sword. The self-confident Carls declared that he could not defeat him and began to use his new abilities. Moto was surprised when he discovered that he had a magical brush, the power of which was similar to the god of war. At a certain moment, the Arab put out his palm, and the general hung in the air, unable to move. But just a moment later, he inexplicably managed to turn around and strike the sheik's hand. After which he hurried to finish off Carls, noticing that his self-confidence instantly evaporated. With difficulty, the Arab managed to dodge the attack. He understood that in fact the process had not completed properly. Moreover, the hellish pain in my hand made it impossible to use my skills. In connection with this, in a hurry he began to run away towards the hole made in the wall. And he even managed, with the help of a magic brush, to barricade the passage into the tunnel behind him with fragments of the wall. Then he rushed to leave this location in order to soon finish merging his hand with his body. Takfu couldn't believe that Carls was able to control metal. At this time, Tao came into the laboratory with the doctor and asked what happened. Yama said that the guy with the brush ran away. Ren, in turn, drew attention to the molecular installation and joyfully said that he would definitely finish the study with it. After which he hurried Moto to give him the skull of the god of war. The general took the suitcase from his shoulders and headed to the doctor. Takfu still could not stop talking about the magic of the Arab, who could even control his sword. Ren asked for more details about what exactly he was doing when he performed these techniques. The perplexed Yama stated that he raised his palm, and there was a strange glow on it. The doctor realized that he had the strength of his hand, because this was the only way to explain what had happened, adding that it still cannot compare with the might of the war god's skull. At that moment, the professor took out the artifact and carried it towards the molecular device. However, after a couple of seconds, armed Ho and he ran into the room. The girl reported that they were all arrested. A distraught Ren even put the skull in the car at gunpoint and said that no one could stop him. Suddenly the room began to fill with smoke emanating from that same installation. After the fog cleared, Takfu rushed towards Jean and declared that it was she who shot him at the harbor. The girl immediately opened fire on him, but was unable to hit him. Yama literally dodged the bullets. Then he got close to her and knocked the pistol out of her hands. Ho was amazed at his dexterity. Jean, in turn, realized that she would have to fight him in hand-to-hand combat, where the general was also very good, which she said with surprise. During the battle, the captain of the dragon department shouted at he to try to take the skull from the machine. However, at that moment Tao's whip hit the floor right in front of him. Yun managed to jump back. Ran did not expect to meet the teenager again, realizing that they did not realize the true power of the skull. The main character called her to step aside and stated that they had brainwashed her. The young lady was surprised and asked what he was talking about. She thought that the guy was just trying to talk to her. But the young man continued to insist that in fact they erased her memory, because she does not remember the last 10 years of her life. The girl did not listen to him and hit him with the whip again, declaring that she had been a member of the organization for a long time. He hastened to tell her that he had seen her documents for enrollment at the Harborne Institute, 10 years ago. Embittered Tao refused to believe him and continued to skillfully wield her whip. As a result, she literally began to beat him, not giving him the opportunity to do anything. Seeing what was happening, Ho urged Yun to use his notorious technique. While dodging, the guy noticed that Feng Shui's ability only works for the supernatural. Thus, Jean was distracted and missed a blow from a rather strong Moto. The doctor, meanwhile, still could not understand what went wrong and why the device did not work. A second later, the molecular installation began to burst at the seams, and Ren became nervous. Realizing that an explosion was about to occur, he grabbed Ran and jumped to the side with her. A moment later, the device actually exploded. It seemed that everything was lost. Takfu managed to grab the professor, but one of the metal parts of the device flew into his back. Tao didn't like that the young man tried to save her and she immediately struck him. Among the dissipating smoke, Jean saw the skull of the god of war and rushed towards it. However, Ran also ran in his direction. The artifact itself seemed to be activated, and sparkling with magic it hovered in the air. Thus, Ho grabbed him by one horn, and Tao grabbed the other, and they naturally began to pull the skull towards themselves. But at a certain moment, the artifact shook and splashed out a powerful wave of energy, with which he scattered the girls around. Yun forgot to warn them about the incredible power and danger of the skull for people. Subsequently, the girls lost consciousness. Ran again went straight into her memories, where she sat with her wounded general after the battle, near the same sakura tree, and gave him water. The guy looked at her and said that there is nothing better than being next to such a beauty like her. Tao smiled and said that he shouldn't drink too much water. Suddenly, the commander began to cough violently, and the young lady became worried about his health. After all, he started bleeding. The young warrior tried to calm her down and said that there was nothing wrong, because it was a normal cough, but she knew perfectly well that it was not so. The general said in a choked voice that apparently he would not be able to keep his promise. Ran burst into tears. The girl hugged him tightly and declared that he should stay with her and protect her. He stroked her silky hair and told her that everything would be fine and she had nothing to worry about. The tearful Tao said pitifully that she would never forget his words. The young man smiled and extended his little finger to her. Ran tried to control herself. She took his finger with her little finger and they repeated their forever vow. At that moment, the beauty woke up in the ward and looked at the main character, who had fallen asleep next to her. Rubbing his eyes, he noticed that she had finally come to her senses, which he joyfully shouted. Tao caught herself and asked where she was and what happened. Ran suddenly found her right hand handcuffed to the bed. The girl became nervous and asked what he was going to do with her. Yun began to calm her down, saying that he wouldn't do any harm in any way and only strapped it in to talk. Tao asked in surprise why he saved her. The guy didn't know the answer, but said that they had already met before. In fact, Ran understood what he was talking about, because she had a similar feeling. The teenager once again called on her to be calm and repeated that she had nothing to fear around him. The thoughtful girl said that this time she would believe him, but she herself did not understand why she answered that way. The guy stepped aside and Tao saw that Ho was lying unconscious on the next bed. She asked what was wrong with her. He said sadly, she had radioactive radiation from her skull, and he has no idea whether she will be able to cope with this in the near future. Meanwhile, Puklia was sitting in the corridor and contacted someone. He stated that he had dug up some information and agreed to meet. Yun had just left the room and heard everything. He became extremely curious about what his colleague was talking about and with whom. Out of surprise, the guy let go of his phone and some notes that contained a photo of Ran and information about her. He looked at the teenager with frightened eyes. He hastened to apologize. Puklia said that he simply reported the situation to his superiors and was able to find out a little. The young archaeologist asked him what the management thought about this. The soldier hurriedly picked up the folder from the floor and said that if necessary, they would help them. You noticed that he works very well and does everything for their team. The colleague said that all this seemed strange to him and he still could not believe what was happening. He was surprised to hear such a thing and, literally starting to shake him, emotionally asked if they had really not encountered this before. Puklia opened the folder with documents, and pointing to the photo, Tao said that it turned out to be more than 2,000 years old, and the artifact did not harm her. The perplexed archaeologist looked at Rant's dossier and noted that this was impossible. At that moment, he remembered his dream with her under the sakura and realized that in fact these were memories. He began to tremble. The soldier said that he would better go in search of some more information. Tao was sitting in the room at that time and kept wondering whether it was a dream or a memory. Unexpectedly, Yun came to her again with a folder in his hands and declared that they needed to have a serious conversation. The girl, in turn, was surprised and asked what exactly it was about. The main character opened the folder with the dossier and said that the age of her bones is 2,000 years. Shocked, Ran snatched the document from him and could not believe what was written. He said uncertainly that it seemed to him that they had known each other before. Tao never ceased to see him as her general. At such moments, it was as if a defense mechanism was triggered in her, and she refused to believe it. The girl suddenly threw the folder aside, after which she threateningly declared that this was complete nonsense and she would not tell him anything. He continued to press her and reassure her that he would never lie to her. However, Ran stood her ground. In fact, she understood that all this seemed to be true. Yun looked at the sleeping Jean and said that she urgently needed help, because she was less fortunate than Tao. When leaving, Yun said that he, like her, had lost his memory. The girl immediately called out to him. She stated that there was only one way to return their memories. The young man turned around. The young lady slowly extended her hand towards him and asked him to give her little finger. At that moment, she again saw the face of her beloved commander in front of her. He agreed, and they touched their little fingers, after which they said their oath. After a short period of time, Yun took control of Hwa's treatment and subjected Ran to some kind of surgery. He placed her in the machine and took some black liquid from the bone marrow. The young man said to himself that everything should work out. A few minutes later Tao woke up from her sleep. The guy immediately asked how she was feeling, but the girl silently rose to her feet, and only then did she say that she was feeling well and the medicine should really help. He happily took the flask with the liquid and said that in this case it would help radiate Jean, after which he immediately ran to her. Ran caught herself thinking that she was offended by how worried he was about this hoe. A couple of minutes later, Yun ran into the room like a madman and confidently declared that this medicine would definitely help her. But the girl, even in such a situation, did not miss the chance to tease her savior, sarcastically saying that it was apparently difficult for him. The guy ignored the lady's already familiar ambition and handed her a flask with liquid. The extremely surprised captain of the dragon department asked what it was all about. He replied that he took it from Tao's bone marrow and it would definitely be able to put her on her feet. Jean was skeptical about the young man's idea, but still agreed to try, since she didn't have much of a choice. Then, gathering her thoughts, the girl overturned the test tube and drank its contents. At this time, Puklia flew into the room with a roar and knocked down the doors. General Takfu entered the room and stated that he had heard about a cure for radioactivity. An exhausted Dr. Ren was on his back. Yama demanded to give him this liquid. Yun, in turn, immediately ordered Jean to quickly drink the contents of the flask. Realizing that the medicine was in the girl's hands, Moto instantly switched to Ho. Yama reached out his hand to her and demanded that she give him a test tube with liquid. The main character, without hesitation, bravely rushed with his fists into an unequal battle. However, the general was superior in strength to the young archaeologist and struck him. He said that it was better for him not to interfere. Jean also decided to try her luck and fiercely rushed to fight Takfu, but she was still weak and Moto could easily cope with her, even though Ren was hanging on his back all this time. Thus, the girl flew towards her bed, and Yama calmly took the flask with the medicine with him, after which the general instantly gave the test tube to the professor and urged him to drink its contents. At that moment, Tao wanted to knock out the healing infusion from him with a whip, but Takfu managed to grab his hand. Then he nevertheless gave it to the doctor and he drank the medicine. The perplexed Moto asked what she was doing. After all, she must be on their side. The girl looked menacingly at Yama. Ran stated that she would not work with them until she regained her memory. The general hurried Ren and helped him get up, saying that they needed to leave. As he left, he looked at the girl and said that Tayaganga does not forgive traitors. The embittered Tao defiantly crushed her whip and declared that threats had no effect on her. Stunned, Moto could not understand what had happened to her and why she was behaving this way. The young lady just looked after them. She hoped that she would soon regain her memory. At this moment, he suddenly came to his senses and asked what was wrong with Ho. Ran immediately ran up to him and helped him to his feet. Yun did not expect such a reaction from her. The main character noticed that the people from Tiagong are extremely stingy and must pay. Tao looked at Jean and said that the medicine might not help her, since the radiation was quite strong. The concerned guy asked what they should do in this case. The girl recommended that we examine the tomb again, because the skull was found there. The teenager looked once again at the captain of the dragon department and declared that he would definitely help her, after which Ran replied that they needed to immediately go to the tomb. Waddles noticed that it was better for him to stay with Ho and look after her, so they would go together. Yun agreed and confidently said that he would definitely get the necessary medicine. Tao, in turn, said that there was too little time and hurried to leave the room. The young archaeologist naturally followed her, hoping to save Jean. Puklia turned his sad gaze to the boss and said no less sadly that she would soon get better. A few minutes later, Ran and he were already halfway to the tomb. The young man asked her to drive more slowly. The self-confident girl said that she drives well and he has nothing to worry about. After a certain time, they already entered the tomb and wandered through the dark tunnels. Yun asked why she liked speed so much and how long she had been interested in racing. Tao ignored his question and said that they needed to activate the stone platform to get inside. The main character replied that for this he would need to use his feng shui technique, after which the young man again crossed his fingers in a characteristic way and a magical golden circle appeared. The surprised girl decided to ask where he learned this skill. He thought for a moment and said that in fact he himself did not know, because he, like her, lost his memory, and he doesn't know where this ability came from. Yun urged her to hurry up and noted that very soon he would regain his memory. Ran also really wanted to remember everything and understand where these strange dreams came from. After a couple more corridors, they finally reached a stone platform. The guy said that last time the skull of the god of war was found here. The young man immediately began to cast magic over the platform, actively using feng shui techniques. The same magical firefly flew out of the device and rushed to the ceiling. Thus, the room was illuminated, and they began to unravel the mystery of the painted wall. Tao, in turn, tried to understand why the feeling of blood resonance arises. She was so deep in thought that she didn't hear he at all. Suddenly, Ran discovered a scepter on the wall, which she joyfully shouted about. An infected man from a skull was drawn next to the magic staff. The main character suggested that the infection has several stages. Next, the torment of a person exposed to radiation was outlined. The people then gathered together to take it to their ruler, who was able to heal the infected with the help of his magical scepter. Subsequently, the irradiated man rose to his feet and regained life. He finally realized that they needed to get the staff to cure Jean. Suddenly, the scepter on the wall began to glow, emitting some kind of magic. They did not understand what was happening. Our heroes once again plunged into memories, where the great general finally returned with his beloved. His soldiers were sincerely glad of his return. The commander noticed that this mausoleum was truly magnificent. He turned to Tao and said that he was in fact a commoner and that he was lucky to win the hand of such a beauty. Ran, in turn, said in surprise that she would never have thought about this. Suddenly the girl burst into tears. The general wiped her tears and said that even death could not separate them. The concerned lady asked how he would keep his promise if his illness overcame him. The young warrior took out a jade talisman from his pocket and handed it to Tao. The guy noticed that if she doesn't lose him, they will definitely meet in the next life. The tearful Ran was amazed at how calmly he spoke about such terrible things. Unexpectedly, the self-confident commander stood up and addressed his soldiers. All the soldiers bowed to him. Their leader declared that they had never lost a single battle and had always fought bravely. At that moment, the girl gave him the armor and put the helmet on his head. The general raised his fist above his head and said that they were obliged to exalt their emperor. All the warriors raised their spears and swords, loudly honoring their highness. After which the young ruler got down from the carriage and went to the soldiers. Sad Tao held the jade in her hands and said that she would definitely find it in her next life. The commander defiantly climbed the steps straight into the coffin. The soldiers continued to shout his name. Ran still couldn't stand it and rushed into the arms of her beloved. Naturally she didn't want him to leave. The guy hugged her tightly and said that she should be strong, because soon everything would be fine. The young lady, through tears, said that if he decided so, then he needed to take one thing with him. Having given him the scepter, she said that women were not allowed in the mausoleum, so he must take this staff with him. The ruler naturally took it and said that it would serve him as a memory of her. Then he climbed into the coffin again and ordered his soldiers to continue this procedure. The soldiers carried the ruler inside the mausoleum, and Tao, heartbroken, looked after him. After a certain time, the girl woke up lying on the main character. She instantly jumped up and began looking for her jade talisman around her neck. Finding him in place, Ran sighed with relief and finally calmed down. Then she looked at he and assumed that she had really been living for more than 2,000 years, and Yun was that same general. Dreams, in turn, could be lost memories. At that moment the guy began to wake up. Tao saw that he had the same habits as the commander. Besides, he has the same memories as her, which means it's really true. Yun suddenly jumped up and remembered that they urgently needed to find the scepter. Approaching the painted wall, he tried to figure out where to find the magic staff. Suddenly closing his eyes, he suddenly remembered that he was in the general's coffin. But he never had time to tell the good news to the girl, as he was ahead of him and said that the artifact was in the ruler's coffin. The guy asked how she knew. Tao replied that she herself didn't understand why it occurred to her. The main character urged Ran to immediately go there and pick up this staff. Yoon stated that it was also necessary to inform the team about this and find out about Hwa's condition. A moment later, Waddle's phone rang in Jin's room. Waddles picked up the phone and asked Yoon how things were going. The captain of the dragon department was already feeling well at this time, which she began to talk about. He told him that an infected person has several stages, which literally stunned him. The young man asked to tell Ho that he had found a cure and that she would soon recover. However, Jin did not appreciate the work of the young archaeologist and said that he should not have worked so hard for her sake. Meanwhile, the professor and General Takfu were sipping tea and discussing further actions. Suddenly, the doctor received a message that the dragon department was in the tomb of the god of war. Ren was happy with this news, but Yama wanted to cure his father as soon as possible. At this time, he and Tao found the same place from their common memories. The main character approached the sealed stone door. Ran looked around. Yun understood that this was really the place, but he didn't know how to get inside. At that moment, their team's helicopter appeared on the horizon. The guy noticed that they got there quite quickly. Puffy, led by Jean, instantly went downstairs to the young archaeologist and Tao. The teenager asked Ho how she was feeling and if there was any weakness in her body. The girl, as always in her repertoire, urged him to be silent and concentrate on the matter. Noting her extremely bitchy nature, he realized that she was fine. The Dragon Division captain expressed her gratitude to Ran for her assistance despite being one of Tiagong. After which they shook hands and the girl said that it was just a deal. Jean said that this was good, because she did not want to remain in debt to her. Yun understood that it would not be easy for him, because one girl is a problem, and two are literally a disaster. However, he was not careful to say it out loud. The ladies immediately reacted and asked what he said. The main character began to deny and urged them to enter the tomb as soon as possible. Ho stated that this is the first and last time she will let her go so easily. Ran looked at her with her indifferent gaze and absolutely calmly replied that this was not necessary. Meanwhile, he returned to the stone slab and continued to think about how to open it. Jean ordered him to use her feng shui technique to try to open the door. The young man said that although she didn't care, his spirit as an archaeologist would not allow her to be treated like that. Without letting him finish, the girl grabbed him by the ear and began to hurry him up. The guy called her to calm down and said that he would now begin the necessary procedure. After which he crossed his arms in the usual way and the magical energy of feng shui appeared. Yun then leaned his palms against the stone slab and muttered something inaudibly. After a few seconds, the door began to slowly open. Our heroic team went to the tomb, where new obstacles awaited them. Suddenly he stopped everyone and said that there was clearly some kind of trap here. But Ho, in turn, ordered him and the others to move on, because they had absolutely no time. At that moment, an arrow flew at Jean, and Yun, as always, pushed the girl aside and thereby saved her again. However, at the same time another arrow flew at them, they again managed to dodge it. The guy did not expect that the trap in the tomb would be exactly this. Looking around, he noticed a huge number of arrows sticking out in the ceiling. At the same time, the stone slab behind them began to gradually close, which was also an unexpected turn. He immediately grabbed the girls and said that they urgently needed to escape, otherwise they might die here. Suddenly, arrows rained down on them again. Yun called on everyone to bow their heads and continue running. Ho noticed that the owner of the tomb was apparently a real devil. Tao decided to intercede and replied that he was a real hero, and she had better shut her mouth. Ran herself didn't understand why she reacted so violently to Jean's words. Dodging the arrows, the captain stated that at this rate one of them would definitely hit them. The guy said in an orderly tone that it was better for them to move their legs and not yell. At that moment, one of the arrows actually hit him in the knee, and the young man felt a piercing pain. As a result, he fell to the ground. The girls, along with Puklia, rushed to his aid. The arrows continued to fly towards him. He only managed to crawl back. Ho could not resist and began to laugh at the young archaeologist, saying that God was punishing him for his stupidity. Yun slapped her hand away and stated that he was, in fact, a law-abiding citizen. The young lady strongly doubted this and reminded him that she had not long ago arrested him for robbing the tomb. The main character answered menacingly that he was an archaeologist, not a robber. Tao noticed that they did not have time for stupid conversations and needed to hurry. Jean asked the guy what happened to Ran, because after entering the tomb she changed dramatically. He said he had no idea why she was acting this way or what it was about. Ho said that her feminine intuition speaks of only one reason. Yun encouraged her to just talk to her, in a girlish way, so to speak. The girl did not like this idea, and she again began to threaten the teenager, saying that she could still arrest him. The young man instantly ended the dialogue with her and ran to catch up with his Tao. Jean looked after him and said that this guy was extremely stupid. Waddles unexpectedly agreed with her. After a while, they continued to wander through long corridors. He still could not scan the tomb. This seemed very strange to him. Suddenly Ran stopped in place. The archaeologist asked what happened. As it turned out, they reached a fork in two roads. Ho asked where they should go next. The main character noticed that one of the roads was definitely a trap and he should think about it. The captain of the Dragon Division approached Yun and said that it might be worth using his technique. The young man asked if she really thought that Feng Shui could show them the right path. Having just angered her, the girl pushed him and urged him to at least try before drawing conclusions. The guy advised her to do something about her bitchy character, after which he nevertheless used his ability to determine the right path. He leaned his hands against the cold wall, on which magical signs appeared. A few seconds later, a fiery light poured into one of the roads on the right side. However, at the same moment the cave shook. The walls literally burst at the seams. Yun began to look around and tried to understand what could have caused such a strong earthquake. As it turned out, General Takfu and his father, a professor, tried to break through the stone slab, but even after shooting at her with a rocket launcher, the desired result did not come. The frightened Puklia asked the guy where they should run now. He could not understand why his beacon had not returned yet, and after a couple of minutes he finally returned to his owner. Yun breathed a sigh of relief. Upon returning, the fiery beacon literally burst into flames, which was not a very good sign, because this meant that mortal danger awaited them ahead. Ho couldn't wait any longer and said that they would have to split into two groups and take two roads at the same time. Naturally, the main character was against such a decision and grabbed her hand. He said that this was extremely dangerous and they should not take such risks. After all, there is a possibility that both tunnels will become traps for them, so he will go first. After which Yun again used the magical ability of Feng Shui. Tao noticed that the young man had a really powerful technique. The guy began to be modest and said that in fact she was not that strong. The restless Jean again hurried the archaeologist and called him to action. He still couldn't restrain himself and told her everything he thought about her bitchy behavior. Ho stretched her fists and said that while she was in the hospital she really missed having fun, after which she began to beat the teenager. Puklia understood that she was really too aggressive. A moment later, Yun was lying on the ground, and the captain stated that thanks to him, she had warmed up a little. At that moment, a bright red beacon suddenly returned to him. The young man noticed that this tunnel also poses a mortal danger. Ran was shocked by this result, because they would have to rely on luck. He said that he needed to think a little, since both roads have the same terrain. At this time, the entire tomb began to shake again. Everyone looked around in fear. The main character noticed that everything is not so simple here and this is not an ordinary earthquake. Yun then sent a magical flow of Feng Shui technique into the wall between the two tunnels. Thus, a fiery trace remained in it, which diverged into huge cracks. Suddenly, a secret entrance opened in the wall, from where a bright blue light emanated. He happily said that it turned out that everything was much simpler than he had expected. The young archaeologist called on everyone to follow him into the open passage, but Ho asked him to test this path with his skill, since it could also turn out to be a trap. The teenager assured her that he was a true professional. However, I still decided to check it out to be clearly convinced of my words. The fiery beacon again rushed into the distance. Yun impatiently awaited its return. The guy said that there were 7 tests ahead and the last one would be the most difficult. Jean said that if it really is that dangerous, then it's not worth the risk. The surprised young man noticed that the scepter was inside and they had little left to heal her, because she could die. Ho replied that there was no point in losing his life because of her, and she did not want him to die. At that moment, Tao took out her whip and hit the ground with it. The perplexed girl asked what she was doing. Ran stated that the matter concerns her somewhat, because she wants to regain her memory. adding that she would not miss such a chance and went straight through the secret passage. Jean, in turn, realized that in fact they were here not only for her sake. Suddenly, Yun grabbed the captain on his shoulders and carried him forward. The girl ordered him not to do this. Puffy noticed that they had no other choice. The young lady continued to fidget. Meanwhile, General Moto was still able to make a hole in the stone slab using a rocket launcher. Ren abruptly stopped him and said that once they healed the body, Yama would no longer need to serve Taigonga. Takfu replied that he would be with him until the end, until the doctor found out the professor's secret. The father said that it doesn't matter to him who they turn out to be, because he sees right through them all, adding that he doesn't want Moto to get hurt again because of his interests. Naturally, General Yama will always remain his father's son and will be by his side. After all, he saved his life many times, and he should repay his parent in kind. At this time, our heroes set off. Ho drew attention to the silver lights and asked the expert what they were. He put his hand to the rock and said that perhaps it was because of these stones. Another stone slab opened up ahead of them. Everyone wondered what would happen next. Suddenly they came to a lake containing mercury, which they could not have expected. The main character called on everyone to cover their airways with their hands, because this lake is very toxic. Ho immediately tore some of the fabric from her t-shirt and tied it over her face, creating something like a mask. The others immediately followed her example, starting to tear their clothes. He noticed that Tao did not do this and asked why she did not cover herself, because you could die from evaporation. However, the extremely self-confident young lady said that this was not necessary. Yun remembered that she really was not afraid even of the radiation from the skull of the god of war. After looking around, Ran came to the conclusion that they had only one way. The girl pointed to a thick wooden stick that lay across the lake, noting that if you fall down, death will occur instantly. Jean pushed the guy and urged him not to be afraid, because there was no turning back, especially since he himself made the choice. Yun noted that their masks do not protect them 100% from evaporation. Puklia, in turn, hoped to find another way, since this one seemed mortally dangerous to him. But Ho stood her ground and said that the piece of wood was not so narrow, and they could cross it to the other side. The main character stated that he had a very bad feeling about this. The captain of the dragon department mockingly asked if he was really scared of some kind of mercury, after which the first one jumped on the stick, trying to keep her balance. Then she defiantly took a couple of steps and said that there was nothing wrong with it. He sighed with relief and seemed to calm down when he watched how boldly Ho walked along the wood. A few seconds later, the girl successfully crossed to the other side of the river and called on the others to hurry up. The main character wondered if he really turned out to be wrong, and in fact it's as easy as shelling pears. Meanwhile, brave Tao climbed onto the stick and announced that she was next. Yun continued to collect his thoughts. Waddles decided to reassure the young archaeologist and said that everything would be fine. After which he, following the soldier, extremely fearfully stepped onto the wooden bridge. However, at that moment he noticed how the lake was agitated and abruptly stopped. Ran and Waddles turned back. Yun shouted that they needed to run. Suddenly, a bloodthirsty fish jumped out of the water towards the frightened guy, but the teenager managed to hit her, thereby sending her back into the river. The young man literally froze in place. He urged him to hurry up and cross to the other side. A couple of seconds later, several more fish jumped out of the mercury lake at them. Tao, using her whip, easily dealt with the predators and continued on her way. Ultimately, she managed to get over to Ho, who shouted that there was still a flock of water monsters behind them. One of the fish was literally a centimeter from the main character, which Jean told him about. Yun immediately turned around and struck a lightning-fast, but painful blow to her metal scales. At the same time, making a sharp movement, he could not stay on his feet and, as a result, fell down. However, at the last moment he still managed to grab the stick and wrap his arms and legs around it. Pisces, in turn, did not stop mass attacks towards the young archaeologist. The guy continued to fight with the local monsters, sending them back to the mercury lake. But one of the fish was able to catch on the wooden bridge with its long and very sharp teeth. Taking advantage of the fact that the whole focus was on Puklia managed to move to the other side of the river, while the extremely unlucky archaeologist fought for his life with bloodthirsty beasts. Ho, in turn, urged him to concentrate on escaping rather than confronting the mass of fish. At that moment, the piranha grabbed the stick and literally bit through the tree. Thus, She bit off a huge piece at the base of the bridge, and Yun began to realize that at any moment he could find himself underwater. The fish seemed to have intelligence and began to further attack the tree along with the young man. The main character instantly jumped to his feet and began to run across the bridge, which after him collapsed and sank more and more into the Mercury Lake. After running a few more meters, he managed to jump towards the shore. Already on the other side of the river, the guy calmed down, because on land the predators did not pose a threat. Suddenly Ho ran up to him and again began to provoke him in every possible way. The girl grabbed him by the ear, after which she said that he had been moving towards them for a very long time. Unexpectedly her hand was pushed away by Tao. Ran decided to protect him and remind him of the original purpose of their stay in the tomb. What even the teenager did not expect from her, Jean looked at the young lady menacingly. Meanwhile, the professor and General Takfu continued to clear away the rubble in the tunnel. Ren assumed that they were far enough away from them and took the lead. Finding themselves at a fork in two roads, Moto asked where they should go next. The doctor urged him to carefully examine the tracks of their rivals to understand where they were heading. Yama examined the area, but there were no signs that anyone had been here. What he hastened to tell his father about, the professor began to think about what to do next. He noted that in ancient times it was usually the left passage that was the right one. Accordingly, he decided to go left and called Takfa with him. At this time, Carls was already approaching the tomb. He was literally flying through the air. Having landed, he caught himself thinking that it gave him pleasure to soar in the skies like a bird. However, this skill had a huge disadvantage. It was excessive energy consumption, and there was no time for recovery. After which the Arab discovered a collapsed stone slab and realized that besides him there was someone else here. The sheik naturally did not want to share with anyone the endless supply of energy that he so needed. Meanwhile, the newly minted team of the Dragon Department was approaching the goal. Waddles noticed the beautiful starry sky, which he informed the others about, then asked what it was. Ho stated that they would take this with them on the way back to be examined later. Suddenly taking a step, she heard something click under her feet. Jean assumed that this was another trap. The main character urged her not to move and ran to her aid. The girl saw that one of the tiles was dented, which means she activated some mechanism, but nothing happened. Turning around, they found a green glowing sphere flying straight towards them. Ho and Yun instantly rushed to run away, but the unknown mass was moving at great speed, after which the magical entity landed and there was a loud explosion. At this moment, several more green stones rushed from heaven to earth. Stunned, Jean asked the young archaeologist what kind of meteorite-like starfall this was. At that second, another emerald stone flew into them. He managed to push the girl aside. The young lady again began to sin against the owner and creator of this cave. The main character noted that now is not the time to blame anyone, and it is worth being more attentive. Suddenly, a completely frightened Waddle ran up to them and asked if they were injured. The captain of the Dragon Department replied that they were fine and the meteorite was over. At the same time, she again began to call the owner of this tomb crazy. Tao was indignant and repeated that she did not want to hear anything bad about this person. Ho continued to defend her point of view and stated that she was telling the truth. In order to defuse the tense situation, Yun offered to examine the stones that fell on them. Jean looked at one of the emeralds and said that the tomb was over 2,000 years old. Suddenly, he covered her mouth with his hand and urged her not to talk about it in front of Ran. It was extremely unpleasant for Tao to watch the caring young man, because he did not show it to her. And looking at the sky strewn with stars, she continued to think that he was her betrothed. After all, it turns out that Yun is the reincarnation of the general. Meanwhile, the archaeologist examined the emerald fragment. The teenager decided to use his feng shui technique to find out the origin of these nuggets. Jean noted their incredible shine, which seemed rather strange to her. Suddenly Ran said that she had seen these stones before. Ho asked her to tell her more about them. Tao tried to remember where exactly she encountered these emeralds. The girl was still able to find a memory of this ore. It was called fluorite and could corrode human flesh. The commander told her about this. The lady immediately urged them to throw away this fragment, as it could harm them. At this time, the guy's magic circle suddenly turned black, which just indicated his unfavorability. A moment later, he felt pain in his hand and threw the emerald aside. After which he agreed that the owner of the tomb was indeed a monster. Suddenly, one of these nuggets flew into him, but the nimble Yun managed to dodge. Thus, the stone hit Puffy, who was standing behind him, and the guy felt wild pain. His clothes literally began to corrode, and his hand was covered with a huge burn. He suddenly turned around and saw Yama and Ren, who stated that they were following on their heels, adding that the left tunnel really turned out to be a living hell, but they still managed. The main character was shocked that they were able to get through the passage. At that moment, they were unexpectedly attacked by huge bats. Takfu immediately began to fight them off. It is worth noting that the general was able to easily deal with the pack of bloodsuckers. Then he headed towards Tao and said that they should finish what they started. Ran grabbed her whip and declared that until he regained his memory, he would not lay a finger on anyone. Moto smiled and, running his hand along the blade of his katana, said that in this case, death awaits them all. Ho at this time began to scream that Waddle's burn was growing and continuing to eat away at the skin. Yun, in turn, sadly said that only amputation of the arm would help. Meanwhile, the general accused Tao of treason and hastened to kill her. Ran replied that he could not understand her true feelings and prepared for battle. The professor insisted that Yama take the living girl, since he needed to examine her bones, which were more than 2,000 years old. Jean grabbed Puddles by the hand and took out a knife. The guy screamed in wild pain. After which, gritting his teeth, he urged the captain not to waste time, but to get the job done faster. A second later, the girl cut off his hand and immediately wrapped a rag around his hand. The guy endured this process with dignity and looked at his rotten hand with tears in his eyes. Ho, in turn, went towards the general, declaring that no one has the right to harm her comrades. Then she rushed to the aid of Tao to finally send Takfa to another world. Having injured his hand, Ho continued to press on him, but the extremely agile Moto constantly slipped away. Ran understood that bloodshed could not be allowed, because the road back was quite dangerous. Yoon also urged the self-confident Jean to stop attacking him, since she is not his opponent. However, the young lady did not want to listen to anyone and continued to say that she would soon arrest this scumbag. But Yama had a different opinion, and at a certain moment he still managed to guess the timing and strike the girl. Ho flew to the side. He instantly rushed to her and said that she should not have fought in such a state. Moto decided to finish the job and rushed to finish off the girl, but Tao prevented him. Meanwhile, the professor was suddenly pierced through by green fluorite. Turning around, the general saw a terrible picture. His father was inevitably dying. Ren literally collapsed to the ground with a roar and began choking on blood. Shocked, Yama could not believe his eyes and understand how this could happen. After which the distraught Carls approached them. The perplexed Moto asked who he was. With the help of his magic brush, he could control emerald stones and demonstrated this to the fullest. Ho never expected to see an Arab here and asked what he had forgotten here. The sheik began to organize a circus and thanked him for bothering to respond to his appearance. The general, without hesitation, rushed to finish off Carls and rushed towards him. The Arab, in turn, said that this time he would not screw up, and they would see his power. After which he began to throw stones at Takfu. Moto understood that he could not cope with him so easily. Yama began to evade the emerald fluorites, actively using his katana. At the same time, the general gradually approached Carls in order to engage in close combat. The sheik noted his skillful skills, but at the same time stated that he could not compare with the power of a god. A moment later, Takf still managed to get close to the Arab and it seemed that victory was close. However, the self-confident Carls suddenly snapped his fingers, and something unimaginable happened. Holding the sword a couple of centimeters from the sheik, Moto suddenly froze in place and could not move. Yama asked when the guy managed to become so strong. The smiling Arab replied that last time he was at the fusion stage. But now everything has changed dramatically. At that moment the katana blade began to be pointed at the general himself. Takfu did not understand how this was possible and why his blade obeyed the will of another person. Suddenly, the sword seemed to escape from Carl's control and flew to the side. The guy said that insects cannot surpass God himself, and that is why they always die. Moto pretended to give up, and after waiting for the right moment, began to attack him. However, the sheik jumped and hovered in the air, then repeated that he was no match for the divine essence. Finally, Yama realized that he could not cope with him and he began to run away. The Arab followed the general. But even the wounded Takfu was able to escape from the distraught Carls. Ho at this time asked him if this was the same hand that belonged to Enko. The sheik, spreading into a malicious smile, noticed that she was now in his possession. Jean realized that in fact it was he who killed the fat man in order to get the magic brush. Carls urged her not to rack her brains, but rather to help kill a couple more people who dared to go against him. Tao, in turn, stated that she was extremely curious to see the true strength of his hand. But the main character was against them, sorting things out, and said that they should not fight. The surprised Arab asked Ho if Ran was not now their common enemy. Dissatisfied, Jean replied that at the moment they are allies, but this is only for a while. Carls rolled up his sleeve and said that he was extremely interested in trying out his unique ability. He looked at him menacingly and declared that he would be happy to demonstrate the feng shui technique to him. The next second, the Arab literally rained down a fluorite meteorite on the young man. Yun instantly used his skill, his hands glowing with golden light. Thus all the stones fell to the ground without causing him any harm. Carls noticed that his technique was really capable of coping with the power of the gods and urged the guy to find out which of them was stronger. At this point, Ho intervened and ordered him to stop this, because the sheik was still in debt to her. The Arab immediately turned everything into a joke and said with a smile that they were just having a little fun, adding that Jean takes everything too seriously and should relax more often. The main character understood that in fact the magic hand was extremely strong. Carl said that he just wanted to see the feng shui technique in action, and he did not intend to kill the archaeologist. He asked him if he could remove all the star stones from the ceiling of the cave. The Arab pointed his hand upward and snapped his fingers and said that he would try to do it. A couple of seconds later, entire fluorite veins fell to the ground. Yun was impressed by the power of the magic brush, which he hastened to report. Pleased with himself, Carl stated that she could also lift heavy objects into the air. Jean did not like that they were distracted from the case and once again threatened them with arrest. The sheik replied that they just decided to conduct a small experiment. Tao, in turn, urged them to continue their journey and go in search of the scepter. Ho took Waddles by the arm and asked the Arab if he really liked Ho. Carl smiled as always and replied that she charmed him with her beauty. The main character noticed that he has a rather strange taste in girls. Jean heard what they were talking about, which made her furious, but she didn't show it. Suddenly an earthquake began. Yun did not understand what was happening, because they had removed all the stars from the tomb. Suddenly, right in front of them, a slab opened in the ground, where there was a staircase down. Rand suggested that this was the entrance to the next level and they needed to go down there. After a couple of minutes they began to go down. The teenager noticed that it looked like the road to hell, but since there was no other way into the tomb, they had to pass another test. There were torches hanging on the walls that were ignited with green fire, which was quite unusual. Carl suggested checking first before moving on and sent several stones into the pitch darkness. The fluorites broke off the steps and rolled down, where the unknown awaited them. The Arab suddenly noticed that the strength of his hand did not work here. In this connection, he asked where they were going and what kind of place it was. Meanwhile, the fragment sent down seemed to hit something, and a characteristic sound was heard. Taking a closer look, he said that he saw some kind of door and they needed to go down to check. Finally reaching that very door, they saw a large tiger sign on it. The young archaeologist was extremely surprised, because it was a beast from the world of the dead. Ho noted that there is no hell or heaven and you should only believe in the facts, which means science. Yun couldn't even think that a girl like her didn't believe in all this. At this time, Tao was confused by something, and she began to speak indistinctly about something. The guy asked what was the matter. Ran came closer to the door and said that this tiger was his emblem. Suddenly the door began to open slowly. Everyone was surprised, because they had not touched anything. Ho wondered if she was definitely not connected to this tomb, since the doors opened when Tao approached. The girl thought about it, as if she was trying to remember her past and said that she didn't know it. Then she turned to He with a request that he help her regain her memory. Naturally, the young man could not refuse his words and said that he would definitely help her, after which he went forward and called on the others not to leave him a single step. Ran looked after him and saw her general, thinking about how much he looked like him. The young lady followed him and wondered whether her lover would be waiting for her there. The general's body was still in the tomb, and the long-awaited meeting was soon to take place. The Dragon Division team, led by Hua, moved further into an unknown area where huge petrified warriors stood. The main character called on everyone to be careful, since there was no torch in this room. Just as Jean pulled Waddles through the entrance, the door suddenly closed. He sadly noted that now there was no turning back, and they would have to look for a way out ahead. Karl said that this was not surprising, because in such a mystical place you wouldn't expect anything else. After which he brought fluorite to the general's metal guards. The Arab was able to determine that they were made of bronze. However, the sheik himself found it strange. He examined the statue again. Then he declared that this bronze product was truly a masterpiece of ancient times. But Ho convincingly asked him not to touch the relic, because he could accidentally break something. Karls touched the warrior again and said that nothing would happen and he could not harm her. At that moment, the Arab hardly tore his hand away from the statue and left chips on it, and some of the bronze fragments stuck to his palm. The perplexed sheik hastened to report that in fact it was just a bronze coating. A moment later, torches were lit throughout the tomb, and everyone began to look around. The stone guard in front of him suddenly came to life, his eyes sparkling with a magical green light. The warrior leaned towards him and grabbed him by the hand, lifting him up a little. The frightened Karls began to demand that he put him down on the ground. Yun immediately rushed to his aid with his unique ability. The general's bronze soldier paid attention to the young man and released the sheik. Then he suddenly fell on one knee in front of the guy and bowed his head. The frightened archaeologist was shocked and did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the rest of the warriors also woke up from sleep and lit up with green beacons. Then they also got down on one knee and bowed their heads in front of the teenager. The main character began to look around and noticed that all several dozen guards bowed to him. Tao, in turn, was once again convinced that this was indeed the reincarnation of her beloved. He began to call one of the warriors to stand up, saying that there was no need to greet him like that. At this time, the general, who was still lying in the coffin, suddenly opened his eyes. The soldier instantly threatened the guy and pointed his long spear at him. The stunned young man managed to dodge the guard's blow and jumped to the side. The rest of the general's army aimed their weapons at Yun, but Ho pulled him away in a timely manner. Thus, they were surrounded by bronze warriors and did not know how to proceed. What the young archaeologist asked Ran about, the girl suggested that it was all an illusion. Karls tried to use a magic brush, but for some reason his power did not work in the tomb. He realized that the task was becoming more difficult and hurried to apply the feng shui technique. But he never had time to use it, as one of the general's henchmen attacked him. As a result, Yun flew straight into Jean. The girl, like everyone else, was shocked by what was happening. The teenager said that they needed to find a way to escape from the guards, because they would not be able to defeat them. At that moment, a spear rushed at him. He closed his eyes and prepared for the worst outcome. But a second later the young man discovered that nothing had happened and he was alive. The main character fearfully opened his eyes and saw Tao, who showed a certain talisman to the warrior, and he froze in place. Taking a closer look, Yun remembered that he had already seen this jade amulet somewhere. Suddenly, the powerful guards chanted Rant's name in unison, and the young lady was surprised. Then she replied that it was really her and they should lay down their weapons. The shocked archaeologist said that his dreams turned out to be true. The girl admitted that she was 2,000 years old, but why the soldiers attacked him remained a mystery. He said that he actually doesn't know, but if this is all true, then he is their general. An outraged Jean burst into their dialogue and demanded to know what was happening and what they were talking about. Yun hastened to tell the story of his dreams and that they turned out to be reality, but in a past life, where he was a general and his guards were soldiers. Ho was at a loss and said that this was all fiction and this could not happen, and reincarnation was just a myth. Even Karls liked this story. He noticed that it was simply unimaginable. Suddenly, his voice came from the general's coffin. He called Tao. The girl began to tremble. A couple of seconds later, the commander broke through the wall of the sarcophagus. Everyone was horrified. Jean extremely nervously asked Ran what was going on and who he was. The bishop continued to break through the walls of the tomb and asked who dared to disturb the peace of the imperial tomb. Ho asked the guy why he was talking about the emperor, because they told her that there was a general there. The main character grabbed his head and tried to remember at least something. The only thing he dug out in his mind was how they shouted before the battle that they were fighting for the emperor. Meanwhile, the ruler finally knocked out the top lid of the coffin and freed himself. All the warriors suddenly began to shout that the dead man had finally risen. Shocked Karl said that this East had always frightened him with its dead. Suddenly, the bronze guards fell to one knee in front of the true lord and bowed their heads. They said that they were very happy about the return of their general. The commander took the scepter in his hands and asked where his beloved Tao was. The girl was happy and asked him if it was all true and he was resurrected. The young ruler called on her to immediately come to him, ran slowly stepped towards him. Then, unable to restrain herself, she ran towards him and said through her tears that she had always believed, because he had made a promise. The young lady immediately remembered how he swore under the sakura to return to her. The emotional influx was extremely strong and literally overwhelmed Tao. But suddenly the main character made a rather strange speech, about her and Sakura. The stunned girl stopped instantly and turned to he and said that these were the words that the general had spoken to her. The distraught ruler's eyes instantly glowed and he asked who this guy was. Yun ordered her to move away from him, since this man is his dark side, and he is the real ruler. The commander immediately grabbed Ran by the hand and declared that he was a real general, and this kid was just blatantly lying. Tao, in turn, got scared and began to demand that he let her go. The ruler replied that he woke up only because of her, and she was so ungrateful. The teenager continued to insist on his own and ordered to leave her alone. The general slowly turned his menacing and cold gaze on him, after which he called on the soldiers to kill this man. The bronze guards instantly rushed to attack the young archaeologist. Ho said that it was time for them to leave, because even if he was their leader in the past, now everything has changed. But the guy continued to stand still, and when the spears rushed at him, he ordered them to stop. The warriors suddenly listened to the young man and froze in place, looking at each other. He continued his game and asked if they really didn't recognize their general. After all, they fought so many battles together and carried this heavy burden for so long. And now they decided to turn away from their ruler, Yun shouted menacingly. The magical warriors looked at each other again, and one of them suddenly knelt down. Because you can take on the image of anyone, but the soul remains one. The general noticed that he now seemed to be looking into his reflection. Tao stated that he was not a real ruler. At that moment, the ruler let go of her hand and took out his magic scepter. After which he said that this was a funny situation, since he had not fought for more than 2,000 years, and now the enemy was his own copy. The main character took the spear and the warrior and declared that he was just a shell pretending to be him. The commander drew his blade and replied that he was extremely curious to look at the clone's skills. Then he rushed to the attack with lightning speed. He, as it turned out, was quite skillful in wielding a spear. He bravely fought off the blows of the pseudo-ruler, who began to press more and more. Having clashed with Yun, the ruler noticed that the guy was much weaker than he seemed. Meanwhile, Ran tried to figure out which of them really was her lover. Everyone stood and watched in horror the fierce battle between the two rulers. Unexpectedly, he was able to escape from the warrior's onslaught and carried out his attack. The general was at a loss and said that this was impossible, because he could not be weaker than him. Feeling his advantage in the battle, the main character hurried to finish the job. Jean began shouting out tips to Yoon and telling him that he should believe in himself. The teenager menacingly declared that he would soon deal with his ridiculous copy. The commander, in turn, smiled and said, apparently, in 2,000 years he had forgotten what he was capable of. At that moment, the young archaeologist literally pierced the ruler with his spear. However, he was unable to cause any damage, because the general was a ghost. Ho noticed that he is so fast that he leaves behind an afterimage. The pseudo-ruler said that if the boy died by his own hand, he would not feel humiliated. He was sure that he was possessed by the evil spirit of the skull and ordered him not to pretend to be a commander. The Lord stated that after he kills him, their souls will merge again. A couple of seconds later, he again ran around him from behind and was able to inflict a painful blow on him. After which he moved away again. Yun began to understand that he could not compare with him in physical strength. Meanwhile, the ruler continued to provoke the young man and say that he was an extremely weak opponent. The main character urged him to talk less and finally take action. However, the general made a different decision and rushed towards Ho. He declared that everyone who entered the tomb must die. He immediately threw a spear at him and said that his only opponent was him. The commander easily dodged and replied that soon his turn would come. After which he continued to move towards Jean and hastened to attack the girl, which, in turn, also had a good reaction and dodged the blow. The ruler noticed that the girl was good enough to be able to withstand his strength and rushed to attack again. Yun followed him and nervously said that he had no right to ignore him. The Lord swung his foot with lightning speed, and the teenager flew to the side. Knowing full well that their strengths are incommensurable, which means he cannot defeat him. He didn't even have the strength to protect the only person important to him. The general noticed that since the young man values her so much, it follows that he betrayed Tao and deserves death. Jean was dumbfounded that someone cared about her and seriously thought about it, after which the commander pointed his sword at her. Ho realized that he was too fast for her. It was difficult for her to accept that now her life would end and everything would go to waste. At this moment, Carls unexpectedly intervened and said that he could not give up so easily. He grabbed the blade of the ruler's blade with his hand and felt an instant weakness in his body. Then he literally shocked Jean and confessed his love to her. The girl did not know how to react to this. Even the general appreciated his action, noting that he liked the magic hand of his hand. The Arab said through the pain that if it weren't for this brush, he would have died long ago. A moment later, the pseudo-ruler cut off his hand in cold blood, the sheik screaming in pain. Jean immediately ran to Carls and urged him to hold on, but the pain was unbearable. The Lord, in turn, calmly picked up the magic brush from the ground. The Arab ordered him not to touch it. After all, he will again be forced to return to his previous life, where he was a nobody. The commander looked at him and stated that he used to be merciful, but now everything has changed. After which he cut the sheik's throat. Carls grabbed his bloody neck. The ruler raised his head and declared that the long-awaited silence had come. Ho literally began to beg him not to die, because it all happened through her fault, which was quite unexpected to hear from her. The Arab, with the last of his strength, said that she was as beautiful as the first time he saw her. Soon he closed his eyes and died. Jean could not believe what was happening. Waddles also didn't understand how the god of war turned into a demon lord. The ruler smiled and replied that times always change, and he liked this status. And in order to reward him for his magnanimous title, he will kill him painlessly. But at this time the main character stood up and ordered him to leave the guy alone. Having called himself the true god of war, everyone was impressed by his confession. The young man said that he was inferior to him in strength, but even this would not stop him. The general convincingly urged him to come to his senses, since the consequences would be irreversible. Suddenly he glowed with some kind of magic, as if something was possessing him. The golden light of his feng shui technique seeped through his hands. Yun looked menacingly at the ruler. All the bronze warriors began to shout something and raise their weapons above their heads. Tearing up, Tao said that the true general had finally appeared. A moment later, the magic disappeared and Ran wondered if his memory really had returned. The commander did not allow him to answer and said that the young man had gone too far, and death was waiting for him. He accepted his challenge and said that he would do everything possible to protect the people dear to him, after which he nervously ordered the magical guard to give him a weapon. The bronze warrior naturally threw him a spear, calling him his general. The main character caught the weapon and turned towards his opponent. The ruler urged him to finally find out which of them is a real warrior and who will die. Using his feng shui ability, Yun launched a devastating attack. The lord also did not hesitate to use his skills, and prepared for the blow. As a result, after a couple of seconds there was a huge and loud explosion. Everyone was shocked by this outcome and did not understand who actually survived. After which the smoke cleared and the two extremely weak rulers stood opposite each other. Suddenly, the body of the young archaeologist was enveloped by some blue matter. The general smiled. Then the smug commander said that the young man's body was at its limit. He could not stand on his feet and went down on one knee to catch his breath. Tao, in turn, already perfectly understood which of them was the true ruler. A moment later, the demon lord was also pierced by the blue matter and weakened. Ran immediately ran to her beloved Yun and helped him up. The guy asked for forgiveness in a choked voice that he could not keep his promise. The girl burst into tears and took his hand, with which he led her through her silky hair, after which he suddenly closed his eyes and lowered his weak hand. Everyone was horrified. Ho and Waddles instantly rushed to the teenager and began to beg him not to die. Jean raised her hand to his nose and suddenly felt his breath. She sighed with relief and said that in fact he was lucky, since he simply lost consciousness. At that moment, his body suddenly sparkled with an incomprehensible magic. All the bronze guards in turn fell to their knees and bowed their heads. Then they uttered rather strange words about how their two rulers had finally merged into one. Ran was shocked by this information, because it meant that they were both true rulers. Ho tried to calm her down and said that apparently it was the same person. Tao looked at her with confused eyes and thanked her, saying that she had found the answer to her question. At this time, one after another, the warriors began to crumble into small stones. Stunned, Puklia asked what suddenly began to happen to them. Rand sadly replied that there was no point in staying in this world anymore, because their patron had disappeared. After which the girl got up and left in an unknown direction. Ho asked what she intended to do. The young lady took the body of the general from the past in her arms and said that he could not leave it here. Then she carried him back to the coffin, realizing that it was finally over. Jean, in turn, approached Carl's lifeless body and said that she would leave him here, because he liked ancient tombs. Tao began to tell the commander that she desperately wanted to stay here with him, but she has not yet completed her mission, and he needs to wait for her. The girl ran her hand over her cheek and said that they would meet again. Then she took the scepter and brush to put them with him in the sarcophagus. But she remembered that Ho needed the staff for healing and gave it to her. The captain of the dragon department extremely reluctantly took the artifact and thanked her for her help. At that moment, a magic hand slipped out of her hands and literally grabbed onto Puffy's forearm.